Earlier, I spoke to Seijiro Takeshita, a professor at the University of Shizuoka, and I started by asking him about Japan's debt crisis.
Well, I think this subject had been swirled around very much by the words of Mr. Shiba, our Prime Minister, who said that our condition is worse than that of Greece, which is simply wrong. Now, I hear your point that, our debt condition is in a very dire situation. That's true, but let's look at the right side of the balance sheet. In other words, if you look at the net assets, Japan had the highest in the past 33 years. It was surpassed by Germany this year. But basically, and if you look at the also composition of the debt itself, 94% of debt is consumed within Japan. So we have a totally different condition to that of Southern Europe. So, of course, I'm not saying we should relax on back of the sofa, but yes, we are obviously in a very much of, I would say, almost a cornered state. That's very, very true, but not as serious as many people depict.
So we've had some interesting, important economic data out. It's a bit of a mixed picture. So core inflation hitting more than a 2-year high in May. What do you think is behind that?
Well, undoubtedly, the inflationary pressure, particularly caused by foodstuffs, which has been rising, and particularly rice, our main diet, which has risen by 93% year on year, and also energy prices went up by more than 8%, which basically resulted in gases going up by 6.6%.
And it seems, though, that consumers are wanting to spend more.
They're one of the, if not the most conservative, consumers in the world. They're very much risk avoidant. So, they basically would start spending only if, in my opinion, they could clearly see the outcome of their corporate activities, that is coming back to its feet and being brisk. You can throw money in their faces, which is what the government have been doing in the past 2 decades, which really does not have the multiplier to the economy. It's been proven. And the reason for that is the conservativeness of the Japanese consumers. And also, let's not forget that, the income hasn't risen for well over 2 decades, in spite of the fact that Japanese corporations have been making, record profit. Now, this year, things are different. Of course, if you look at the wage negotiation, you can see all the companies finally starting to raise, their pay, their wages. But obviously, the mood, or I should say the atmosphere or the sentiment of the consumer isn't that positive because, as you just reported, the rise in inflation is certainly dampening, their consumer sentiment without a speck of doubt.
And can Japan realistically manage inflation while its key export markets are weakening due to these increasing trade tensions, especially with the United States?
It would be very, very difficult, to say the least. In fact, it would be almost impossible considering the fact that Bank of Japan do not have the power to alter the trend of weakening of the yen. Many people talk about the rate rise, but I think Bank of Japan's maneuverability is very limited. They don't have the deep pockets that, European central banks or Fed has.